I'd rather make a little bit of guaranteed money than maybe a lot of maybe money or maybe lose some. It's why I never really liked gambling. I never really got into, the casino, or when a lot of people were doing those sorts of things. It didn't really attract me in the same way. I prefer to be able to manage my own risk. I think from a business perspective, I like to be in control.
Welcome to another episode of the I Love Monday podcast. Today we have property investor, PropertyByKazy. Welcome to the show.
How you doing, brother? You okay?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I told you, you dragged me back from Dubai, so a little bit, not really jet lagged, but a little bit tired. But we persevere.
No, it's good. So what have you been up to?
Yeah, so I was over in Dubai. They always say it's good to have multiple streams of income, so that's somewhere I've diversified into. Obviously, from a tax perspective, it works well, and then just having a different type of business. I think sometimes as well, it takes you out of the monotony of just doing property as well.
So what is it that you're doing in Dubai? What kind of business?
So we initially started in luxury packaging. So we provide your typical sort of Selfridge style bag to brands out in Dubai. We then sort of branched into both project management and an element of marketing as well.
Okay. How are you finding that space? It's different to property in itself.
I think it's very different. I think the good thing about business is a lot of skill sets are very transferable. So, once you kind of understand that, property a lot of the time and business as a whole is a real people business. Found the same thing over there, that people buy into you. So obviously just making sure you focus on delivering a high level of customer service, making sure you kind of, if anything, under promise and over deliver. And then just also sort of timelines, due diligence, and sort of focus to detail as well.
Okay, wicked. So how was Kazy as a teenager growing up?
I don't know. I'd like to say I was. I don't know. How was Kazy? I was all right. I probably wasn't the best behaved, wasn't the worst. Was somewhere in the middle. Got good parents. I think, although I might have not always been exactly on sort of doing the right thing, I was maybe doing the wrong thing in the right way, and I was always sort of polite to adults, teachers, etc. I think always entrepreneurial, so always kind of wanted to make money, and that was sort of a driver very early on.
What kind of things did you try to make money with early on?
So, early on, super conventional paper rounds, but then realized, okay, that's not enough money. And obviously the paper round company, they're like, they pay you more if they put leaflets in it, but only a little bit more. So then I started approaching all of the local businesses and saying I had a distribution business, and they could pay me directly. So we get double and triple the amount. So I think that kind of skill set about sort of really being able to know how to maximize your time is something that's probably put me in good stead for later on in business.
So did you actually put the leaflets in the newspapers?
Yeah.
So you were getting paid twice for one job?
Yeah.
Smart thinking. So when did you start getting into property?
I didn't, formally get into property until I think I was 22. I think when I bought my first property, 22, 23. Probably 23 actually when I bought my first property. But prior to that, I knew that I had an idea. I wanted to get into it, started sort of just being around other developers, working out what they were doing, seeing how I could use what I had at my time, which was I had a car, I had a hatchback, could put stuff in the back of my car, I had time, so use what I had at my disposal to make myself beneficial to those developers so that I could learn from them and also create a value proposition for some of those developers as well.
So what kind of things were you doing?
So to start with, I just say, look, you know what, let me kind of just come and shadow you. Off the back of shadowing you, working out what people needed, okay, so you need somebody that's gonna call the suppliers to get the energy installed. You need somebody that's gonna be here to meet the deliveries. You need someone that's gonna be doing the oversight. So effectively, off the back of starting to do that, rather than say, okay, can you pay me? I'd say, look, how about I take a percentage of the profit or percentage of something, which again is probably an easier proposition. If you're taking money at the point where everybody's making money, rather than adding to their fixed costs, it's sometimes an easier proposition as well.
Okay, so how did you transition from that into your first deal?
So I guess whilst doing that, I ran another business, which I ran simultaneously to go into university, which was a Shisha Business.
Okay.
So I think they always say like you've got to do something that you enjoy. First time going to Egypt, I was like, this is hard. Like shisha, something social. I didn't drink, so it was like something for me to do. Then I checked into the margins and they were crazy. Like they were like 1,000% uplift. So set up that shisha business, made some money from that. Started doing pop-ups, then festivals, then like nightclubs, and then finally got like a fixed location near my uni. So did that, made some money from that. But basically, the place that I had a license to trade as opposed to a lease. And for those that are familiar with that commercial property, that license to trade is like a tenancy agreement. Effectively, your leaseholder at any point can say, we want you to leave with 2 months' notice. So you can't really reinvest. So although I had this business, I didn't feel like I was in control of the asset. So I think that kind of pushed me towards saying, okay, how can I control the asset? How can I, because the place had a massive basement, it had all this potential, but I didn't have the correct contract or the correct ownership in place to be able to actually add that value.
So what kind of money were you making from your shisha business? Was it like sufficient for you, or?
Yeah, I mean, it was enough for my lifestyle, and it was enough to save some money. So I think when I went into my first deal, I had, maybe sort of 80, 90,000 pounds that I saved up from business, that I was able to go and buy a property at auction. Or auction? I don't know if it was auction, but I know I used a bridging loan.
Okay. And what kind of things did you learn from your shisha business as well?
So I think definitely just learn about, it's a lot of customer facing roles. So, obviously learning about actually getting retained customers, getting people to come back, making sure you keep people happy, learning about actually marketing is a big thing because, just because you've opened a shop doesn't mean people are going to turn up.
Yeah.
So actually understanding how to build a brand, looking at, I think so that was kind of my first dive into the Instagram world as well. Okay, like, what was working then, isn't necessarily going to work now, and understanding that you've got to be very current when it comes to the social media side of things. Also how important your network is. So the people that you have around you, being able to leverage their friend groups, your own friend groups, to actually be able to, because the people that are going to buy from you in the first place, a lot of the time are going to be friends, family, people who actually either like you or buy into you as a person.
So what kind of steps did you take to build your first brand or to build that brand?
So I think I'm naturally quite risk adverse. So in terms of the building a brand, it was more about proof of concept. So to start with, invested a small amount of money to buy a small number of the shisha pipes, and basically created a value proposition. So that was going to existing venue owners and saying, look, I've got the shisha, I've got something I can provide. Now, right now, I don't want to sign a big contract to pay you all this money, or I don't want to, take over the space. But what I can do is I can offer it to, and I can sell it directly to the end user, the consumer. You can advertise it on, your website, flyers, etc., to say that we have shisha now. So you've got a USP. You don't have to pay for the labor. You don't have to pay for the materials. You effectively just get an additional product to get people that are going to come and spend money on the bar. So effectively creating a win-win, like a value proposition for myself and for the businesses I wanted to work alongside.
And then what about the social media aspect? What is it that you were doing that was building your following, building your brand, and essentially building your customer base?
Yes, I think from the social media side of things, it wasn't just social media. That kind of, because if I'm honest, social media for me was very much accidental. I wasn't the guy who was the go-to social media guy. If anything, when my social media started to do quite well, my friends would laugh and say, you barely know how to turn your phone on, sort of thing. But at the time, it was more just, as opposed to social media, just general marketing. So knowing that we were in close proximity to the university, going down to the university when they're having their freshers weeks and their freshers fairs, and speaking to people and saying offering deals, like you said, doing things that you learned early on, leafleting campaigns, very direct things. But then also saw the power of social media in terms of using the early on blog pages that were people's go-tos, when everybody followed these blog pages, and actually speaking to them, offering the owners you can come down for free if you want, if you post it, and things like that worked quite well early on.
How are you deciding your marketing budget? Was it structured, or were you just spending in the early stages?
I think early stages, and I wouldn't necessarily advise this, but early stage, it was very ad hoc. So it was like, okay, you make some money, you spend some money, and when you make money, you reinvest it, as opposed to, okay, this is our marketing structure and this is our marketing budget that we're gonna, have over the next. So we didn't really look at long-term timelines at that point.
Okay, and then what's happened to that Shisha business now?
So when I got into property, again, it was a case of having the premise didn't have the longevity. And it's probably something that, ironically, full circle, I'm in conversations and I've looked at venues over the last couple of years. Obviously, if the back of COVID, it sort of delayed things as well. But it's something that I would get back into. But when I got into property, to start with, I was doing both. So it was a case of, Shisha business, we were open till 1 a.m. By the time you get home, it's 2 something. Property starts super early in the morning. And it was just burning the candle at both ends, wasn't sustainable. And one of them I could see the longevity in, which was the property, which is why I focused there. But like I said, now, there's more capital that I can just say, okay, I'm going to put money into something. Then we are looking at getting back and reopening the premises. But that's, 8, 9 years on. So I think for those kind of budding entrepreneurs, it's, you don't have to do everything all at once. Probably a takeaway.
Would you do anything differently now compared to when you first started it, 8, 9 years on?
In terms of if I was going to do a venue now? Yeah, I think in terms of, like I said, so particularly the type of contract that we had that we were trading under, they're understanding specifically different areas have different attitudes towards, whether it's development, whether it's, opening a business. So actually focusing on an area that has quite a positive attitude towards maybe shisha bars because it's going to give it more longevity.
Yeah. Okay. And then what was the first deal that you got? Because you got that on a bridging loan, you said.
Yeah, so the first deal, I'm pretty sure it was an auction purchase. I'm pretty sure it was an auction purchase, and it was a bridging loan that I used to buy it. It was a 1-bedroom flat from a housing association, quite a rundown, unloved state. Could see the potential to improve the obviously condition of the property, looking at the relative comparables, but also because it had that large separate kitchen, the opportunity to take it from a 1-bed to a 2-bedroom flat, which is really where a lot of the value is. And in a market like we are now, where it's in a lot of, for all intents and purposes, it's more of a buyer's market. If you are buying property, that you've got to really be able to force that value of the property up. You can't just rely on the market sort of dragging you along with it. So it's a strategy that worked then and it still works now. And I think effectively once you did that deal, that was like my proof of concept to say, okay, you know what, this makes sense.
So was it then just a case of rinse and repeat?
Yeah, for the most part, for a period, it was a case of rinse and repeat, and then obviously go on and do bigger deals and bigger projects, but very much so, like outside of property, like my background's economics. So I live in the numbers, I live in my spreadsheets. For those that follow the PropertyByKazy page, you'll see that my spreadsheets are 8 pages long with what if analysis and, a summary page and all of these things to really understand, that what impact changing factors have on the deal. And really, I've always been guided by what do the numbers say. So whether or not, there's no point in my career I'd say I wouldn't go and do a 1 to 2 bedroom flip, even if I was doing, massive developments, if the numbers made sense and it was a good return on investment.
It's just fact, isn't it? Numbers.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing where if there was a auction where we offered, I think it was about 330,000 max, and someone offered about 370. And what happened is, after a while, that property came to us to sell, but he said he'd done his numbers all wrong. It was his first deal, and I think he was either going to break even or make a loss of 10,000. But when you're in the property space, your numbers have to be spot on. But to make a loss on a property deal, when you've done pretty much everything right, it's not
Yeah,
a good
the numbers they insulate, because things can change, base rates are going up on a quarterly basis at the moment. During COVID, some things like steel, timber, glass were going up 50% over a very short period of time. There are going to be these what if factors, but buying at the right price is what is going to allow you to, worst case, make less profit, as opposed to having to hope you sell it for maximum values. I think there's 2 things. You buy at the beginning and you buy smart at the beginning, but you also make sure you think, okay, who is my end user going to be, and make sure it's fit for purpose. Because I've seen deals where like, I've seen friends that early on wanted to do their first property, over personalized it, sold this deal, and they thought this was an amazing deal. I've done this great refurb. They had like a black kitchen in it, black gloss kitchen with blue LED lights, a super masculine kitchen. The day after they sold that property, that kitchen was in the skip.
No way.
Like, but as a brand new refurb. Now, if they potentially had said, you know what, do it a little bit more generic, kind of think about the end user as not a bachelor, but as a family home, they may have got an extra £10,000 because the people aren't factoring in, I need a new kitchen. So it's a bit of give and take. You have to do the numbers right, and you have to obviously also make sure you do the design right as well. And I think that's something a lot of people sometimes neglect.
So you say you're risk averse. How does that affect you in terms of the numbers?
I mean, it means that I probably haven't made as much money in a lot of cases that I could have. Last month, so we got like the PBK community now, which is like a community of property investors. And a lot of the time people say, can I JV with you, X, Y, or Z? So we had an opportunity to do a JV. Now I'd done my numbers on this deal. Deal had like probably good return on investment. It was looking at about 39% on capital employed. Got a JV partner on board. They were fine. We went ahead. My maximum bid based on the numbers was 300,000. So because it was an online auction, I bid 295. The next bid was 300. It sold for 300. Now obviously I could have gone that little bit more, but in my head I'm like, look, that's where my numbers were, and I just stuck to it. And I think it's an example that realistically I could have done that deal, and maybe I would have gone to 305, or it could have gone higher, but I could have bought it for 305. But because I'd said, look, this is where my numbers say that the deals make sense, I'm able to just say, look, have a very clean cutoff point.
Have you always been like, risk averse in terms of like even when you were younger?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like I'd say naturally, like, you know, I've been quite risk adverse. I've always kind of just looked at things and said, I'd rather make a little bit of guaranteed money than maybe a lot of maybe money or maybe lose some. It's why I never really liked gambling. I never really got into, you know, the casino, or when a lot of people were doing those sorts of things. It didn't really attract me in the same way. I prefer to be able to manage my own risk. I think from a business perspective, I like to be in control. Yeah. And I think the more risk you take, the less control you have.
I think it's interesting because a lot of people in business, they tend to say they like taking risks, and a lot of people do say take your risks, but then your risk-averse strategy works for you, and it's not necessarily low risk, low reward. It's more stay in control, and you're staying in control for your spreadsheets.
Yeah, it's risk mitigation. So, for example, there's times where I've been offered bigger deals, but then when I look at the numbers on the bigger deals, and I'm like, okay, I could do this deal, and it's got, for argument's sake, like a 39% return on investment. But the additional risk factors mean that if I do another deal with a 36% return on investment, but they have way lower risk factors, my actual return is better on the lower percentage in terms of my risk, because there's an element of risk that is the what if, that is the unknown and unquantifiable in the larger deal. And don't get me wrong, like I think now obviously I'm looking at some much, much larger projects, but it's because I've got to that point where I feel a lot more comfortable.
That's where your experience kicks in.
Exactly, and experience mitigates risk.
When you do your refurbs, how are you calculating the projects now? Because construction prices, like I said, steel, timber from COVID has just gone up.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like obviously, if we're doing ground up, then kind of just got to work off sort of price per square meter pretty much, as subject to it not having like, you know, a massive basement or something like that. They are where they are, depending on obviously the construction methodology, but you kind of know where they are. Ironically, conversions and renovations are a bit more what if, because you're dealing with buildings that are at the moment 100, 140 years old, some of them, you know, that you take down the wallpaper and the wallpaper was what was holding up the walls. So you have to kind of more go off precedent as opposed to, you know, just the initial quotation. I think, I don't know for yourself, but generally speaking, sort of, you know, like a 10% contingency in terms of from a budgeting perspective.
That's generally what we do as well.
Yeah.
But recently what we found is where where a house renovation would cost 100 to 120, now you're looking at closer to 170, 180.
Yeah, like prices have definitely changed. I think there is scope in the market for some correction on that, because I think what was happening is prices were down here and people were quoting down here. Now material prices were steadily going up. Because of Brexit, there was an exodus of labour, which meant labour prices also went up, which meant that there was an undersupply and an over demand for good builders, which meant people were kind of just charging what they want. And there hasn't been a re-establishment of a going market rate. And I think as demand slows slightly, you know, due to a number of like factors, both economic and other, that there's going to be a re-establishment of market price. Because I think what was happening a lot of the time is people were so scared about prices going up, like from a top level. If you're running a construction company and your labor costs are going up, your material costs are going up, like, you know, your interest costs are going up, all of these things are going up, you're quoting here just in case it gets to there. Whereas as they kind of standardize the pricing again, then people can standardize the margins they want to make. So I'm not saying they're going to drop down to that 130, 140, but maybe from 170, they kind of restabilize at 155 for argument's sake for that same refurb.
Where are you seeing the property market going now?
I mean, that, you know, there's the old adage, obviously, you know, in terms of like UK property, it's not time, you know, not trying to time the market, it's about time in the market. And I think as much as there are going to be changes, and we're seeing it with, you know, there was talks about, you know, rental caps and now the renter reform bill and different things. You know, the reality is we live on a small island with an infinite amount of space. That's one of the most desirable, particularly in London, that's one of the most desirable cities to live in. I think it's forever been in the top 5 cities to live in the world. There's forever going to be that demand that unfortunately the supply can't match. So, you know, prices are going to continue to go up over time. In the short term, with the impact of you know, political factors like Ukraine and Russia, you know, economic factors, both monetary and fiscal, that, you know, I think we are going to see a contraction in, you know, maybe the end of sort of Q4, going to start to see that, you know, some properties start to struggle a little bit more. Those people that maybe, you know, were quite comfortable when rates were at, you know, 2%, with them going up to 4.5%, 5%, are going to really see the pinch. And you're maybe going to see some people, particularly because of changes in taxation as well to buy to let properties, going to see more properties come to market. If there is an oversupply for a short period, those that are duress sellers or have to sell under pressure are going to sell for slightly less. And I think there are going to be some deals to be had from a buying, from a property perspective, from an investing perspective. But I think over the longer term, you know, the property prices are going to stay pretty much where they are for the foreseeable future. And then it will be down to sort of government intervention. Is there going to be a new Help to Buy scheme or something similar? We've already seen, you know, like the 0% deposits and things like that come back. So I think it's really just down to market forces effectively.
We've seen quite an interesting kind of events. We've seen buyers come in and offer lower, and we've also seen buyers come in and offer above asking as well. So we've seen both, and what I've noticed is investment properties, the 2-bed flat, which are not nice to live in, but they're good to rent out because they still command a good rent. When they're advertised at 325 and the values around that, people are coming to offer about 300. The properties where people are coming to live in, maybe people's second homes, where properties advertised at 500, we've had offers at 520, 525, and people willing to spend 150 grand, 200 grand just doing it up. We've seen that, but I think short term there'll be slight up and down, but long term I think it will go up. And I think from the 2008 recession, it was the same impact. It went down slightly, and then the prices went up, I think, about 30-40%.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's it. It's just basic supply and demand. Like, unfortunately, there's been no time where the government's met, you know, the supply of housing, like in terms of what the quotas were supposed to be. So the house prices are going to continue to go up, particularly, you know, if you do create a good product. At the end of the day, for everybody, property is not an investment for everybody. It is a home for, you know, for the majority of people. And if you create that product that's very desirable, in the same way that people will pay a premium to have the brands they want when it comes to what they wear clothing wise or what they choose to eat, people will pay the premium to have the comfort of where they want to live and have the type of property that they want to live in.
And also the demand for rental properties is still going through the roof because there's people still coming into the country. We put a job advert out for a sales role and a admin role. For both of them, we had probably 40% of applications were from like India, Ghana, Nigeria, and people are still coming into the country. And even if you look at the medical sector in healthcare, the nurses who are raised here, born, they're going abroad because they're getting more, they're getting paid more. Same as the doctors. We're getting doctors again from the poorer countries, and because they all come in here, they need a place to live. And the doctors are going to live like doctors, so they want a good product or a good home, rather than just someone who's just bought a standard 2-bed flat, which isn't a good standard.
And the reality is, when you look at the market, like, you know, although rates have gone up considerably from where they were, they're still not crazy. So your first-time buyers are still buying because it's still cheaper, because rents have gone up by so much, to pay your mortgage, you know, than it is to pay the rent. Your people that are not first-time buyers, they've benefited from prices going up considerably, so have a considerable deposit, so potentially can buy their second home or their, you know, their forever home at a much more, you know, reasonable price. So, you know, in terms of the market sub kind of £1 million, I think it's still very strong.
There was a recent property market report that came out and it said 10% of landlords are leaving the market. Why do you think that is? And do you think it's a good idea long term to leave the market?
I think that there's a lot of accidental landlords. There's a lot of landlords that, you know, I own the property, partner owns a property, move in together, and now you end up like as a landlord, when realistically it was just your home. And I think for those people that were accidental landlords, don't necessarily they didn't buy maybe in an area that yields the best, or didn't look at you know, amenities, or didn't look at transport links, and also maybe the property isn't structured in a way where it's the most tax efficient, sort of with changes in taxation laws to properties that are owned in your own name. Realistically, even if you're benefiting from capital appreciation over time, if, you know, it's losing you money on a yearly basis, when we say, you know, is it a good idea? For some people, it's not optional. It's like, if it's losing me money, unfortunately, I've got to sell the property. And I think there are a lot of the people that we're seeing selling. Like, that being said, we're seeing, you know, institutions, banks making commitments to buy significant amounts of property in the UK, you know, real estate space, which obviously I have a saying, which is kind of follow the money. When you see like big players doing certain things, it's generally an indication that they've done enough market research to say that actually it makes sense. So i.e., if you see Barratt Homes are building out, you know, a 4,000 unit scheme in a certain area, if you've got a block of 4 flats that you're developing, chances are you're going to do pretty well, because they would have done the research to say that this actually makes sense. So I don't necessarily think it's a good idea that these people are leaving the market, but everything is sort of opportunity, isn't it? People leaving the market, if there is going to be additional stock added in, then it's an additional potential opportunity to buy stock up at a cheaper price.
I think for landlords, like accidental landlords, if they're like have not entered property as a business or as an investment, they're just seeing property as a passive income and it's paying the rent. But as soon as their interest rates go up and all of a sudden they've got to put money in, or their return is very, very little, then they're going to think, you know what, let's just leave and then do something else. Because either, number one, they don't understand it, number two, they don't like it, or it's just something that they don't want the stress of.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of the reason we're seeing landlords leave. But the portfolio landlords, they're either buying up, like you said, banks, Lloyds come here to buy 50,000 homes. I think they're looking to buy a block in Romford. We've got like clients like banks in Abu Dhabi, they're looking to buy up stock, and they're looking at both the private let market and the short let market. So if you're looking at following the money, they see longevity here in the UK. And then in Dubai, where people are saying, buy in Dubai.
Yeah, no, definitely. You know, you're definitely still seeing a lot of people buy, and it definitely still makes sense. Obviously, it just has to make sense for you personally. And sometimes, you know, restructuring So you mentioned there about, some of the banks that are buying in the shortlets. And for some people that are maybe, if you are that accidental landlord that's struggling, maybe rather than sell up, it is a case of, okay, can you repurpose? Can you now use that property as serviced accommodation? Would it maybe work as an assisted living property? Like, how can you operate in the times that you're in? Because it's not always a case of just saying, let's give up, but sometimes it's a case of, okay, so let's adapt. The market has changed.
What is it that made you go to Dubai when you wanted to open or have a secondary stream of income?
So, do you know what? It was a case of, like, every time I've done something, it's never been full on by design to say, okay, I want to go over here and I want to do that. Like, I was visiting a friend of mine who's now my business partner over there, and we were just talking, and we were talking about both our strengths and some of the opportunities, and the business kind of just like created itself off the back of opportunity, off the back of saying, okay, you know what, let's try something because we have these opportunities there, and effectively without doing anything, you're sort of just leaving money on the table. So it was the fact that I had a good partner that I was able to work alongside, which was helpful. It was the fact that we saw the opportunity. The culture of the country, was something that was really appealing to me. The culture of business over there and opportunity. And then just also enjoying it as like a second home almost as well. So it just ticked a number of boxes.
What is it about the culture that made it appeal to you?
I think there's very much like when you meet people over here, like sometimes things can be very cagey. Like everybody plays their cards very close to their chest. Whereas I think there's almost a culture of if somebody likes you, it's like, let me show you what I can do for you. It's kind of like the business ethos. So it meant that, you can kind of get into doing bigger things at an earlier stage.
Do you find it easier to learn about like different businesses there as well?
Yeah, I think, like I said, people are less cagey.
Yeah.
People are very much more so, okay, like, so what can we do? Like, how can we do business? As opposed to, what do you do? This is what I do. And then let's just sort of leave it at that. There's a lot more, okay, like, how can we be collaborative? How can we, what can you help me with? What can I help you with? And vice versa.
I think over here in UK, a lot of people are trying to find that just for the sake of knowing. Whereas I think in Dubai, or because it's such a business hub, like everyone there is for business or everyone's there for work. People want to know, to explore opportunities, and it's easy to connect people because everyone's there for business. Like, Kazy's in property, let's connect Kazy with James, for example. And I think that plays a big impact on why I've seen a good few amount of people recently make their way over to the Middle East. Yeah,
I think, like they have the conversation about it. Sometimes they can be very much like, growing up as Londoners, like a crabs in the bucket mentality that like everyone's trying to get their way out, but pulling each other down at the same time as a means to do that, as opposed to uplifting each other and having more of like an abundance mindset. And I think it doesn't matter if you go to Dubai or you go to Canary Wharf or you're in, in these areas, and you're looking up and you're saying, look, like there's millions and billions of pounds being made on a daily basis. And like all you need is a small percentage of that, like on a daily basis to, to be in a totally different space. And I think when you kind of embrace that mindset of more abundance, that like somebody else making money isn't going to stop you from making money, then you end up in a way better place, like way quicker.
I think here as well, it's you don't tell anyone your secrets because someone else is going to copy it.
Yeah.
That shop's going to copy me.
Yeah, like I remember at the beginning, like when I first started doing like the Instagram lives during lockdown, and then like a couple people I had on, like I'll just ask them a question, like, oh, so like where do you invest your HMOs? And they're like, oh, I don't really want to say. And I was just like, yeah, okay. But it's like, the reality is like, somebody else going to do a HMO, all they're going to do is like, I mentor people that be like, okay, I want to know where to buy HMOs. And I tell them, I'll introduce them to my contact, like, in the HMO department, because the reality is like, they then building relationships as well that hopefully, as long as like you all have the same mindset, that's mutually beneficial. And I think that concept of, a lot of the people that I've worked alongside, whether they were further along, whether they were behind me, like, if you have a mentality that you want to see those other people that you genuinely like win, like your wins will help each other out.
And I think also with social media, your reach is now global.
Mm.
Whereas, for example, if you just got a newsagent across the street, your reach is just the people who pass by.
Yeah.
But when your reach becomes global, you've got enough people in the world, and like you said, you just need a small percentage of people to trust you, and that's where you're making your business from them.
Yeah, like I think, and it's, you're not always on social media directly to do business. Sometimes just on there because like when I started out, like there wasn't any, like I said, same thing like when you asked about the businesses, there wasn't a plan of, I'm going to start this social media. It was just a case of, you know what, I'd had this funny conversation actually, ironically, with my friend in Dubai, like, and it was like, because my friend's wife's brothers are all kind of up to no good, and the mum just like she just knew us all together as just them young boys, but she would see me in a tracksuit all the time and think, oh, like I'm just up to no good. So when a friend was, my friend's wife was telling them, nah, like Kaz he does property, she was like, yeah, okay, whatever, like, So it was funny. So I was like, oh, you know what? Let me actually start doing it, because there's gonna be people that don't really know what I'm doing and just think, I'm maybe doing whatever because they don't see me. So it was a case of doing it and then start to have conversations. And even sometimes when I can't be bothered to do property, like I can't bother to do the Instagram side of things, then I'll go out to like Brixton Pop or something, and I'll meet somebody like, I bought my first house because I watched this video, and I'm like, that's so outside of just, I'm gonna go and make money. It's like putting information out there creates opportunity, and creating opportunity is where you start to obviously create your own luck. So like when I was out in Dubai, I literally on the way here, I had a phone call with somebody who I met in a club in Dubai, and he was like, yeah, just take my number. Then he happens to be a footballer and was like, yeah, I want to give you this money. But it's just like, he was like, I've been watching your videos for ages. But there was no intention at that point in time to be like, let me go and build this brand. But I think there's a concept that, successful people are lucky because they're proactive. They're not just successful because they're lucky.
And I think also because you're giving out information, it's all free and it's all correct information, people are trusting you more. And when people trust you, whether you're looking for it or not, people always remember you.
Yeah, of course.
And if someone becomes interested in property investment, they'll look at the knowledge that you've given out. So they'll either approach you or, like you said, you met someone randomly and he's like, you know what, let's do some business. And I think that's the key thing about social media. Essentially, it's content marketing, but giving information away for free.
Yeah, because like the thing is, like if you can help people, the chances are that when you can't provide everything. So obviously I'm at like High Castle Estates, right? And like you might do a lot of the different processes. So I know, you guys do the lettings, the sales, renovations, X, Y, and all this different, but there might be something that you don't provide EPCs. If a client calls up and says, have you got any, and you provide them a good EPC provider, and like, have you got anybody that does like interior design? Oh yeah, I know this person. So because you've been that go-to person, they're gonna come back to you for the services that you do provide as well.
And then they go to someone else and they refer, and it becomes
exactly like an
effect.
Ecosystem of like, of just effectively doing business.
What's one advice you'd give to someone who wants to start out in business?
Do something that you enjoy, because it's gonna be a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And if you don't enjoy it, you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna have burnout. So I think you have to have some element of not everything, but some part of the business that you genuinely enjoy. And the motivation has to be more than money, because if it's just money money gets boring after a while. Money gets like, well, I've got enough, or there's always more to get. So I think definitely try and focus on something you actually get an element of enjoyment out of.
Do you think people need motivation or discipline? Or is it a bit of both?
I think you got to understand because some people are naturally disciplined, but naturally don't have motivation. So I think, one thing that I always advise people to do, and maybe this is maybe an answer to your previous question, is do some personal analysis on yourself. Understand what your attitude towards risk is. Understand what kind of learner you are. Understand like what your shortcomings are, what your strengths are. Do that personal SWOT analysis and use that to work out where you need support, or potentially who you should get on board as a partner or as an employee. Because there's no correct answer to, do you need motivation or do you need discipline? Like some people are naturally disciplined but not naturally motivated, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's very true actually. If you were sitting next to Kazi, who's 15 years old, what is it that you would tell him?
I'd tell him, listen, enjoy your long hair. It's not going to be there forever. Enjoy the cane rolls. I'd tell him, you know, I mean, there's loads of stuff. There's loads of stuff, obviously, in hindsight from an investment perspective of stuff that we know. But I think I would tell myself as a 15-year-old, yeah, just find something to focus on and be the best at that, because everything else can come off the back of being really good at something in particular. Like if you're the go-to guy for something, like we spoke about in business, you can then do all these other things, or you can invest in, or you can take the money from that to invest in all these other opportunities. And it's like a premise that we learn in economics that like there's always benefits to trade, and specialization. So if I specialize in one thing and you specialize in one thing, like I specialize in making wheat, you specialize in, you know, making grain, for example, like we will both do that most efficiently, and then I would buy the other from you, and we would still both be more productive on the back end.
It's like I was just speaking with a solicitor today, and he said there's one person who used to be a property conveyancer. I think he used to be a partner at a law firm, and his friend was good in tech. And they came together and they've built a product which fast tracks the conveyancing process. And you know how difficult a conveyancing process can be, but it's two heads who are experts in their game. And now they've created a product which, I can't remember how many employees they have, but I think it's about close to 200 now. But it's, again, becoming the best and then becoming the go-to people as well.
Yeah, and so like in business is really about solving a problem.
Yeah.
Like in most cases, you've got to solve a problem or solve like a desire. So if it's, you know, the speed of conveyancing, and you know from being in industry, if you can find a solution to that, you know, you're going to be onto a gold mine.
100%. Just before we finish, we'll have a quick fire round. Favorite food?
I'm gonna have to say pizza recently, because I've been killing a pizza in Dubai, man. Papa John's has got me in a headlock.
Favorite holiday destination?
My favorite place I've been to is Cuba, followed closely by Jamaica.
Okay. Favorite book?
What's my favorite? I don't know if it's my favorite, but a book I reread *Sapiens* recently. I find that it was just a very interesting concept of the world.
Favorite movie?
Movie. It's a bit cliche. Probably Goodfellas, if not Casino.
And favorite day?
Date, like a date night?
No, favorite day. Day of the week.
Oh, day of the week. It's got to be Sundays, man.
Chill out.
It's got to be Sundays, man. Little football on a Sundays, like football in the morning.
What team do you support?
Arsenal.
You butlers.
Yeah, listen, you got to be in it to win it.
Kazi, thank you very much for coming on.
No problem.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.